How about we take that one? Does that work?
No, there we go.
I can pass it over to him when we're ready, if that's okay. Okay. The Personnel Subcommittee will come to order. Subcommittee meets today to mark up an original bill, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2025. We will hold this subcommittee markup in open session. I am confident that we can conduct our business in public without disclosing classified information or adversely affecting the process. In this regard, I ask that any senator wishing to offer an amendment or raise an issue of classified nature defer that action for the full committee's consideration. While this subcommittee meeting is in open session, the entire contents of the markup book are subject to amendment throughout its consideration by the Armed Services Committee and are therefore embargoed until passed by the full committee and reported to the Senate. Traditionally, the subcommittee has used the chairman's mark as a markup vehicle. Without objection, we will use the chairman's mark as a markup vehicle subject to amendment. So ordered. There being no objection. I remind members when calling up an amendment for consideration, please identify the amendment by amendment number. This courtesy will help eliminate confusion and speed up consideration of all amendments. Consistent with this practice and precedent of both this subcommittee and the full committee, the following amendments will not be in order and will not be considered. Amendments involving a significant matter that is not within the jurisdiction of this subcommittee, amendments that involve jurisdiction of another committee that has not agreed to consideration of this amendment for inclusion in this subcommittee's markup, and amendments that will constitute an earmark. Further, it has been the practice that any amendment to add funding must be accompanied by an offset. Accordingly, if any senator proposes an amendment that would increase spending, he or she must also identify an offset to pay for it. Unless the offset can be made from funding under the jurisdiction of this subcommittee, the amendment must be offered at the full committee. I am proud of how this subcommittee has worked together in a bipartisan manner to make sure that we honor our promises to take care of service members and their families. I want to thank Senator Scott for being a great partner as the ranking member of this subcommittee. This mark authorizes funding to support a 5.4% across-the-board pay raise for military members and a 2% pay raise for the Department of Defense civilian workforce. It also includes an updated pay scale to increase junior enlisted pay, which will result in a 5.5% pay raise for E1 to E3s. While I would have liked to see higher pay raises for our civilian workforce, the Fiscal Responsibility Act that we were forced to adopt to keep the government open back in 2023 sharply cut into those civilian pay raises. This mark also continues to help DoD address military recruiting challenges, including providing military recruiters more access to secondary schools. I particularly appreciate Senator Kane's leadership in supporting the Troops to Teachers program, which will continue to deepen the relationship of communities with the military and veterans. This mark also establishes an independent commission to address quality of life considerations for both military and civilian workforces. And I appreciate the work of all of the members of this subcommittee to hold the military services accountable when they fail to meet their recruiting goals. The subcommittee markup package consists of 109 legislative provisions, 28 items of special interest, and 5 budget items. The details of this markup package were briefed to the staff of all committee members over a week ago, so I will limit my comments to matters of particular interest. There are 3 provisions I am particularly pleased to see us include. First, I've been concerned about the injury risks from blast overpressure. Since I first joined the Armed Services Committee, I worked with Senator Ernst to secure a long-term study of blast overpressure injuries in the FY 2018 NDAA and additional requirements to track blast overpressure injuries in the FY 2020 NDAA. Last year, the New York Times reported on heightened brain injury risks for U.S. troops in Syria fighting ISIS. Each of these units had members with serious blast overpressure injuries, and the units have experienced high levels of mental health issues, including at least one suicide in each unit. We've also seen other tragedies linked to this type of exposure. In October, a mass shooting took 18 lives in Lewiston, Maine. The shooter, a grenade instructor exposed to thousands of blasts, had brain damage similar to those seen in veterans exposed to blast overpressure. I am particularly grateful to Senators King and Collins for their close partnership to address preventable brain damage and future tragedies. In February, this subcommittee held a hearing on the effects of blast overpressure and the need for DOD to better protect our troops. I am deeply grateful that Frank Larkin shared the story of his son Ryan, a Navy SEAL deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. Frank detailed Ryan's blast exposures and his deteriorating mental health. Frank said that Ryan knew what was wrong. Before he lost his life to suicide, Ryan made his family promise to donate his brain to science to help save other lives. This mark requires DOD to update blast overpressure safety thresholds, to establish a standardized treatment program and policies, to encourage service members to seek help, to modify existing weapons to reduce exposure, and to establish strategies to protect those most at risk. It also includes $4 million in funding for a 4-year special operations demonstration program on brain health and brain trauma, which will help programs like Home Base in Massachusetts, Florida, and Arizona. Second, I would like to note that this mark addresses pharmaceutical supply chain risks. In 2019, Senators Cotton, Kane, Romney, and I first rang the alarm that DOD's reliance on foreign manufacturers, particularly China, was a major national security risk. A 2021 DOD Inspector General report found DOD is overly reliant on foreign-made pharmaceuticals without sufficient strategies to address domestic supply chain dysfunction. The hearing this subcommittee held in April made it clear that 3 years later, we remain vulnerable. This mark requires DOD to develop a plan to access safe, high-quality pharmaceutical products to eliminate and mitigate risks in the pharmacy supply chain. I look forward to continuing to work with Senator Scott and the other members of this committee to enhance domestic manufacturing so that we don't have to count on the goodwill of our enemies to keep us healthy. And third, I'd like to talk about child care for just a minute. Accessing child care remains a problem for all families, military and civilian. 2/3 of active duty military families have children living at home. I know this is a top priority for many of the members of the Personnel Committee, and I've appreciated Ranking Member Scott's partnership and commitment on this issue. One of the biggest problems is that we are simply not paying child care workers enough. DOD recently reworked its pay scale for the first time in 30 years. This mark includes a provision to further modernize their compensation so military families can have the child care they count on. These are only a few of the highlights of the legislative package we present for markup. I want to thank all the members of the subcommittee and the full committee for their work, as well as their staff. I particularly want to thank the committee staff, John Clark, Gary Lealing, Andy Scott, Sophia Kamali, Noah Sisk, Jenny Davis, Sean O'Keefe, Katie Magnus, Brendan Gavin, and Isaac Jalkanen. Did I get it right? Good. I also want to thank Paul Bonicelli, Matt Harmon, and Sarah Salas from Senator Scott's staff, and Brandon Alberts, Danielle Haynes, Mandy Smithberger, and Carissa Wilkinson from my office. At this point, I invite Ranking Member Scott to make a statement.
Is this working?
Here, take mine.
Okay. Thanks. First, I want to thank Chairwoman Warren for her leadership of the Personnel Subcommittee. In keeping with the tradition of the Armed Services Committee, this committee has worked together in a bipartisan manner on this year's personnel mark. I'm proud of the mark we produced and will now briefly mention some of the highlights. Our mark includes a number of provisions designed to help with recruiting and retention of military personnel. To share the pride of our service to our nation with more young Americans and encourage service in our armed forces, the mark will increase by 100 the required number of junior reserve officers training corps units across the country. The mark also requires each military department to maintain a waiting list of schools that have requested a JROTC unit, so we can better evaluate the national needs for additional expansion. The mark requires high schools to provide equal access to military recruiters as they do for other prospective employers. Additionally, the mark would require colleges to provide contact information to military recruiters for students who drop out and who agree to have their information shared. People withdraw from college for many reasons, but in almost all circumstances, joining the military is an excellent option. I'm glad we were able to work in a bipartisan manner on this common sense legislation to expose more people to the benefits of military service. Recruiting military doctors and nurses is a particular challenge facing the department. And this mark will address that issue by increasing the maximum recruiting bonus for future military doctors, which is the first increase since 2008. In the area of retention, the mark increases the legal cap for the skill proficiency cash bonus program, which will allow the military to offer a more competitive monetary package for service members with highly desirable skill sets. Military quality of life plays a critical role in retention decisions, and the mark addresses this in several significant ways. As a former junior enlisted sailor, I am especially pleased with the provision that would authorize the payment of basic allowance for housing to junior sailors assigned to sea duty. The mark also provides authority to pay for high-speed internet for service members who are living in on-base military housing. For military families, the mark authorizes a school meal program at military schools. The mark also requires the Department of Defense to review and redesign the compensation and staffing model for its child care centers, which will ultimately help expand child care capacity. The military health system remains a crucial warfighting capability, as well as a unique benefit for our military personnel and their families. The mark authorizes TRICARE to provide tele-behavioral health care regardless of the location of the provider or the patient. This will help address the national access to care challenge for mental health services for military families. The mark also authorizes the Secretary of Defense to reduce or waive pharmacy cost share requirements for military families stationed in remote locations far away from a military clinic or hospital. Lastly, I would like to commend the chairwoman on her efforts to highlight and address the risk of blast overpressure exposure. The mark includes several provisions that will help prevent, track, and provide exceptional care for troops harmed by blast overpressure. I'm glad we're able to work together on this important issue. These are just a few of the highlights in this year's bill. Again, I want to thank Chairwoman Warren for her leadership. I also want to thank from the majority Gary Leland, John Clark, Andy Scott, Noah Sisk, and from the minority Sean O'Keefe, Katie Magnus, Brendan, Gavin, and Isaac Joke. You said it right. I look forward to our continued collaboration as we work to pass a final version of the National Defense Authorization Act. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. We have received 36 amendments that have been cleared by both sides. Members have before them a list of 36 amendments, starting with Bud 002 and ending with Gillibrand 542. Is there any objection to adopting these amendments? Without objection, the manager's package is adopted. Are there any other amendments? If not, I will entertain a motion that the subcommittee adopt these agreed amendments as part of the Personnel Committee mark. Is there a second? Good. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Motion is agreed to. I move that the recommendations of the subcommittee be reported to the full committee and that the staff be authorized to draft the bill and report language implementing agreements reached today and to make necessary technical and conforming changes. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion is agreed to. Is there any other business to come before the subcommittee? Subcommittee is adjourned.